Before the seismic shift of 1979, the relationship between Iran and Israel was one of pragmatic partnership, a reality that now seems almost unimaginable. Under the rule of the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran was a key regional ally for Israel, bound by shared strategic interests. They were two non-Arab powers operating in a largely hostile Arab-dominated Middle East. This alliance was far from secret. It was a cornerstone of both nations' foreign policy. Iran supplied Israel with a significant portion of its oil, a vital lifeline for the young nation's economy and security, while Israeli advisors provided expertise in agriculture, infrastructure, and crucially, military and intelligence matters. This was a partnership built on mutual benefit and a shared perception of common threats. This era of cooperation, however, was built on a political foundation that proved to be fragile. The Shah's secular, pro-Western monarchy was increasingly at odds with the deeply religious and nationalist sentiments brewing within Iranian society. For many Iranians, the close ties with Israel and by extension the United States were seen as a betrayal of Islamic solidarity and a symbol of the regime's subservience to foreign powers. The Shah's secret police, Savak, which was partly trained by both the CIA and Mossad, became a hated instrument of oppression. The friendship with Israel was thus inextricably linked in the popular imagination to the very autocracy the people sought to overthrow, planting the seeds for a dramatic and violent reversal of alliances. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was the cataclysm that shattered this alliance. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the revolution's clerical leader, returned from exile with a worldview fundamentally opposed to the Shah's. He established a theocratic republic based on a revolutionary Shiite ideology that sought to export its principles across the Muslim world. In this new ideological framework, Israel was no longer a partner, but a primary antagonist. It was branded the Little Satan, a proxy for the Great Satan, the United States, and an illegitimate entity occupying sacred Islamic land. The new regime immediately severed all diplomatic and economic ties, closing the Israeli embassy in Tehran and handing it over to the Palestine Liberation Organization. With this ideological transformation, enmity toward Israel became a central pillar of the Islamic Republic's identity and foreign policy. It was not merely a political dispute over territory, it was a religiously mandated struggle for the soul of the Middle East. The Iranian government began to actively promote a narrative of resistance, framing itself as the true champion of the Palestinian cause against an expansionist Zionist entity. This ideological commitment would drive Iran's actions for decades to come, leading it to cultivate a network of proxy forces across the region. The goal was clear: to challenge and ultimately dismantle the State of Israel, transforming a once quiet partnership into one of the world's most intractable and dangerous rivalries. Following the 1979 revolution, the hostility between Iran and Israel did not immediately erupt into open warfare. Instead, it descended into a long and complex shadow war, a clandestine conflict waged through proxies, sabotage, and assassinations. Iran, understanding it could not challenge Israel's conventional military might directly, adopted a strategy of asymmetric warfare. It founded, funded, and armed militant groups that shared its anti-Israel ideology. The most formidable of these became Hezbollah in Lebanon, an organization that grew into a powerful political and military force on Israel's northern border. Iran also extended its support to Palestinian groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, creating a ring of fire designed to exert constant pressure on Israel from multiple fronts. As Iran's influence spread, so too did Israeli fears, particularly concerning Tehran's burgeoning nuclear program. Israeli leaders viewed the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran not as a deterrent but as an existential threat, a weapon in the hands of a regime that had repeatedly called for its destruction. This fear drove a covert campaign to sabotage and delay Iran's atomic ambitions at all costs. This campaign utilized sophisticated cyber attacks, most famously the Stuxnet virus that crippled Iranian centrifuges in 2010. It also involved a series of targeted assassinations against top Iranian nuclear scientists, brazen operations carried out deep inside Iranian territory that demonstrated the reach and lethality of Israeli intelligence services. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, provided a new and volatile arena for this shadow conflict. Iran intervened decisively to save its ally, President Bashar al-Assad, deploying its own Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and mobilizing thousands of proxy fighters. This created a direct Iranian military presence on Israel's northeastern frontier, a red line for Israeli security planners. In response, Israel began a relentless campaign of airstrikes inside Syria, targeting Iranian military bases, weapons convoys, and command centers. For years these strikes were rarely acknowledged publicly, but they represented a direct, albeit undeclared, military confrontation, with both sides striking and counterstriking in a deadly high-stakes game. This long-running covert war created a dangerous cycle of escalation. Every Israeli airstrike in Syria, every assassinated scientist, and every act of sabotage was met with Iranian vows of revenge. Iran, in turn, funneled more advanced weaponry to its proxies, including precision-guided missiles for Hezbollah, and sponsored attacks on Israeli interests abroad. The Shadow War normalized a level of violence that would have been unthinkable just a decade prior. It was a conflict fought with plausible deniability, where both nations could inflict serious damage on the other without having to claim responsibility, all while pushing the region ever closer to the brink of a full-scale open confrontation. In the years leading up to 2025, a series of flashpoints began to tear away the veil of the Shadow War, exposing the raw hostility beneath. Tensions in Jerusalem, particularly around the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, repeatedly ignited wider violence, which Iran and its proxies used as a rallying cry across the Muslim world. Each clash was amplified by a sophisticated Iranian information campaign, framing Israel as an aggressor against Islam and justifying retaliatory actions by its network of allied militants. These events were no longer localized. They were triggers in a regional powder keg, with every incident threatening to spark a much larger conflagration that would draw in the primary state actors directly. The targeted killings of high-profile military and scientific figures also dramatically raised the stakes. The assassination of senior IRGC commanders, often attributed to Israel, was seen by Tehran as a direct attack on the state itself, demanding a forceful response. These assassinations eroded the unwritten rules of the Shadow War, moving the conflict from the periphery to the very heart of the Iranian security establishment. Simultaneously, the Abraham Accords of 2020, which saw several Arab nations normalize relations with Israel, were perceived in Tehran as a grave strategic threat. Iran viewed these diplomatic pacts as an American-Israeli effort to build an anti-Iran coalition, effectively encircling the Islamic Republic and isolating it from its Arab neighbors. This perception of encirclement fueled a more aggressive Iranian posture. Tehran accelerated its support for the Axis of Resistance, empowering its proxies not just to resist Israel but to actively challenge the new regional alignment. The established red lines began to blur dangerously. Israeli strikes grew bolder and Iranian retaliation became more direct. The years of clandestine operations and proxy battles had created a volatile equilibrium, but this balance was now collapsing under the weight of escalating provocations. The conflict was evolving from a fight over influence in Syria and Lebanon into a direct ideological and military struggle between the two regional superpowers themselves, with both sides preparing for an inevitable clash. The final catalyst came in June 2025. Following the assassination of another high-ranking IRGC general in Damascus and reports of major sabotage at a key Iranian nuclear facility, the invisible line was crossed. For Iran's leadership, the strategic patience that had long defined its policy was exhausted. The Shadow War was over. The need to re-establish deterrence and respond to what it saw as an existential assault on its sovereignty and national pride overwhelmed any remaining caution. This was the moment the decades of covert strikes, proxy battles, and simmering animosity finally boiled over, pushing both nations over the precipice and into the terrifying new reality of open, direct warfare. The war began with an unprecedented barrage. In a massive show of force, Iran launched over 550 ballistic missiles and drones toward Israeli military and civilian centers. Simultaneously, it activated its entire axis of resistance. Hezbollah unleashed a storm of over 1,000 rockets from Lebanon, while Hamas and Islamic Jihad launched attacks from Gaza. Militias in Syria and Iraq joined the fray, targeting both Israeli and American assets across the region. This coordinated assault was designed to overwhelm Israel's famed air defenses and demonstrate Iran's reach. While Israel claimed a 90% interception rate, the psychological and physical impact was immense, with at least 28 killed and thousands of Israelis evacuated from damaged homes. The Israeli and American response was swift and devastating. In an operation codenamed Rising Lion, Israel conducted its first-ever direct military strikes inside Iran, hitting over 900 targets, including IRGC bases, command centers, and weapons factories. Then, on June 22, 2025, the United States intervened directly. B-2 stealth bombers dropped powerful bunker buster bombs on the fortified Fordow and Natanz nuclear sites, while Tomahawk missiles struck the Isfahan facility. The stated goal was to obliterate Iran's nuclear program. The strikes also targeted Iran's leadership, killing senior IRGC commanders and several top nuclear scientists, in a clear message that for Israel and the United States, the era of immunity for Iran's regime was over. The 12-day war, which ended with a fragile ceasefire on June 24, inflicted a terrible human and economic toll. Iran reported over 600 killed, though human rights groups placed the number above 1,000, with nearly 5,000 wounded. The strike set back its nuclear program by years, according to United States and Israeli officials, and crippled key military infrastructure. The conflict sent shockwaves through the global economy, causing an immediate oil crisis and destabilizing markets worldwide. It triggered a new surge of refugees and deepened the humanitarian catastrophe in places like Gaza. The world watched in horror as the United Nations held emergency sessions, and major powers like Russia and China called for restraint, their condemnations doing little to halt the violence. In the aftermath, a tense and uncertain quiet has fallen over the Middle East. Supreme Leader Khamenei has vowed revenge, while Iran's parliament has moved to suspend cooperation with international nuclear inspectors. This war was not a sudden event, but the inevitable culmination of a 45-year Cold War. It was the violent eruption of decades of deep-seated ideological animosity, strategic competition, and proxy conflicts that had metastasized across the region. The direct state-on-state violence has shattered old paradigms and drawn new bloody lines in the sand. This conflict represents a clash between two irreconcilable visions for the future of the Middle East, a struggle whose devastating consequences are only just beginning to unfold.